Women were prominent figures in the civil rights movement, but as we all know, there's hardly ever any mention of them in history books that usually focus on the role and tactics of a handful of male leaders like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. But this leaves the all too common illusion that women were not at the forefront of the struggle for equality, and that the women that we do hear about stumbled into the civil rights movement on accident. This is not the case, and there are many examples that prove otherwise. Ella Baker was born in 1903 in Norfolk, Virginia. As a child, she grew up listening to her grandmother tell stories about the slave revolts, which influenced her desire to fight for racial equality and social change. After college, she worked for the NAACP as a field organizer and did a lot of on-the-ground grassroots organizing to get African Americans registered to vote. In 1938, Baker joined the staff of the NAACP as a field secretary and then as a director of branches from 1942 to 1946. She spent half of each year making trips into the South, helping build and support local chapters, and focusing her outreach efforts on ordinary people from janitors to housekeepers. Her work in this period helped create the network that provided the base for the civil rights movement in later decades. During this period, she advocated for starting up literacy campaigns and put together workshops to train African Americans to become grassroots organizers too. One of the activists that she nurtured at these workshops was Rosa Parks, who went on to become an officer in the NAACP's Montgomery, Alabama chapter before she made history by refusing to move to the back of a bus in 1955. Ella Baker's on-the-ground organizing and the radical politics and tactics that were emerging in the South inspired her to move her organizing efforts into building a movement for social justice on a mass scale. She was inspired by the bus boycotts taking place in Montgomery and knew that it was important to create a vehicle that could keep that momentum going. Baker saw the boycott as a launching pad for the civil rights movement that she had long envisioned and worked for as a mass force that would empower ordinary African Americans to wage their own battle for equality. Along with Bayard Rustin and Stanley Levinson, Baker formulated the vision for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and she helped persuade Martin Luther King, who had just finished the successful boycotts in Alabama, to take the mantle of leadership and convene the conference. The SCLC was born, and the rest is history, as they say. She was the SCLC's first full and, for a long time, only staffer. And the organization went on to organize and lead some of the largest marches of the Civil Rights era, like the March on Washington, that brought nearly 300,000 people into the streets. After her important work at the NAACP and the SCLC, she was again inspired by the growing militancy and the burgeoning student movement was adopting. After the sit-in movement took off in Greensboro, Alabama, and set up a chain of student lunch counter occupations throughout the South, she saw the need for more effective organization among students and helped organize a conference for student activists. Out of this meeting emerged the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which would evolve as another key organization that advanced the struggle for Black liberation and brought many people into the movement. Stokely Carmichael, who worked closely with Ella Baker in SNCC, once said, quote, "The most powerful person in the struggle of the 60s was Miss Ella Baker, not Martin Luther King." Baker didn't only lend her voice to the civil rights struggle, though, in the U.S. She also supported the Puerto Rican independence movement, spoke out against apartheid in South Africa, and allied herself with a number of women's groups, including the Third World Women's Alliance and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. She was a pivotal behind-the-scenes figure in progressive African American politics until her death in 1986. And over the course of her life, she was involved with nearly 50 organizations, coalitions, and support networks that left an indelible mark on the civil rights movement and the worldwide struggle against racist and economic oppression. Another one of these amazing women in the civil rights movement that we don't hear about is Ruby Hurley. She was a lawyer who was often referred to as, quote, the queen of the civil rights movement because of the leadership that she brought to the legal struggle against discrimination in the South. In an encounter involving the historic sit-in demonstrations at a lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, Ruby Hurley cited the Constitution, then yelled, quote, what we're saying, Mr. White folk, is this. You wrote it, and all we want you to do is live by it. She was also an official of the NAACP and played a leading part in the investigations of such prominent cases as the murder of Emmett Till, who was a Black youth from Chicago who was slain by 2 white men while visiting his uncle. And in the same year, the shotgun killing of Reverend George W. Lee, who was engaged in the Black voter registration drive in Mississippi. In 1956, she helped prepare the case that led to the admission by the University of Alabama of its first Black student, which was a landmark effort in educational desegregation in the South. And in 1961, she worked for the admission of Hamilton Holmes and Charlene Hunter to the University of Georgia. Another one that I actually came across while doing research for this talk, which was really interesting, she was pretty cool, was Patricia Stevens Dew. She was a civil rights activist and organizer who had a long career in the struggle for civil rights. At 13, Patricia Stevens challenged Jim Crow orthodoxy by using the whites-only window at a Dairy Queen. As a college student, she led demonstrations to integrate lunch counters, theaters, and swimming pools, and was repeatedly arrested. Her most notable arrest was in 1960 when she arrested and was tear gassed for attempting to desegregate a lunch counter at a lunch spot in Tallahassee, Florida. She was arrested and spent 49 days in jail, but the results were historic. Patricia Dew, her sister, and the 3 other students who participated in the lunch counter sit-in became part of the first jail-in in the student sit-in movement. In choosing to serve their jail term rather than pay a court-ordered fine, they were sending a militant message, which was, "We chose to go to jail instead of paying for segregation, which is what we felt we were doing if we paid the fines," Dew said once in an interview. Patricia Stevens Dew and 7 others refused to pay the $300 fines for violating laws that they knew were racist. 5 of them served the full 49-day sentence, including Patricia Stevens Dew. As a leader of the sit-ins, she became a national figure. In years to follow, as she worked tirelessly to fulfill her dream of equality under the law, Dew would be tear-gassed, arrested, jailed, harassed, and shot at countless times in the name of equality and social justice. Dew paid a price for this devotion. She wore large, dark glasses at night because her eyes were damaged because they shot a tear gas canister in her face. It's devotion to the struggle. And it also took her a decade to graduate from Florida A&M because of her suspensions due to her activism. Her FBI file ran more than 400 pages. Her stepfather urged her to give up civil rights to protect her and his own job, and she was kicked and threatened with dogs, including a German Shepherd, which the police handlers gave a racial slur for her name. And she continued to organize into the 70s, 80s, and beyond. These women, along with the countless other women that I couldn't mention in this talk, were active agents of change and most definitely not only spectators in a movement that was emerging in the United States. The common misconception is that the civil rights movement was solely led and organized by men, but history shows us, and the number of women in this room attending a political meeting shows us, that we will play a pivotal role in the past, present, and future struggles for liberation. Even though most high school textbooks will flatten the civil rights struggle to this or that leader, usually Martin Luther King, it is the same problem with the history of women in the Black liberation struggle and many other struggles. The examples of strong, leading revolutionary women, the examples of strong, leading revolutionary Black women are many. This rich history is hidden because the achievements and momentous efforts of these women do not conform to society's patriarchal and racist norms. And it is because of this that we must carry out a political struggle today to demand our true history be taught, and ultimately fight for a new system that puts workers and oppressed people in control of educational institutions. Setting the record straight will require something more than writing history. It will require us to make it.